Today we're talking Boris Johnson and the condition of his leadership of the Conservative Party. I'm joined by Tim Montgomerie, my colleague on Reaction. I'm Iain Martin, editor of Reaction. Now, what sparked all this, Tim? There's been a sort of spate of stories in recent days which have got people talking in the commentariat and the political class and the sort of Tory end of it, those who are not on holiday, about whether Boris is sort of blowing up really in real time. And there was particularly that splash in that main story in the Sunday Times on Sunday about Boris threatening extraordinarily to demote Rishi Sunak. And there was also the story in Scotland where he blundered on with making a bad joke about coal mines and Margaret Thatcher. What do you think's going on?
Yeah, well, I think the trigger was that poll that we discussed a week ago, Iain, when Conservative Home found that Boris Johnson's support amongst Tory members had plummeted. I think people in Downing Street would probably say, well, then since then they would excuse it all by saying it's been a relatively quiet news week and scribblers like you and me are looking to fill our YouTubes and our column inches with speculation about the Prime Minister. But I would warn against Downing Street being complacent, actually. I sort of sense it amongst friends and family as well. And one of the theories that I have is that, there is a certain shelf life. I think this is an expression you've used in the past. There's a certain shelf life to a politician's appeal. The thing that they have, the agenda or the charisma or the shtick, only lasts for a number of years. And I just wonder whether people are getting a bit bored with the whole Boris Johnson routine. And it's probably happening quicker maybe than it normally would, because we've been through this period of the pandemic where over the last 2 years, probably the average British citizen has probably paid more attention to the utterances of politicians in a week than they normally would in a month. And I think they've seen so much of the Prime Minister during this period, like some of it, probably not liked a lot of it. And I think it's beginning to catch up with him. Some of the mistakes, some of the lack of attention to detail, some of the gaffes of the kind we saw in Scotland last week.
Yeah, it's that old, and I'd always quote it, but it's what Gordon Brown called the 7-year rule, which pretty much does fit. It's about 7 years is about the maximum that the punters, the public, will take someone being the prime figure, the big figure in politics, telling them what to do. Now, Boris, on those terms, the Boris story really goes back to 2004, 2005, doesn't it? And the whole "Have I Got News for You" era and being fired by Michael Howard. So he's been, if not the biggest star, then one of the biggest stars in British politics consistently since then, with that fame growing all the time and the expectation that he would, or his determination, just this psychodrama, was he going to get to fulfill his ambition? And then, of course, he did. And it's been then a very intense 3 years, or 2 years as Prime Minister. But that period since 2016, so much has happened. How does he get it? How has he got himself into a situation, though, with Rishi Sunak in particular, in which he blew up, as Tim Shipman recounted last week, on seeing a story about Rishi Sunak having written him a letter on the pandemic reopening, but to be threatening to demote a Chancellor when there is an inflation shock potentially round the corner and he's entering a very difficult autumn politically, that's mad and self-destructive behaviour politically, isn't it?
Completely. Oh, and this, of course, without labouring it, is not the second time he's fallen out with one of his chancellors. There's a pattern here, and it's the same issue of Boris Johnson wanting to spend a lot more than the Treasury thinks is sensible for the country. But you may want to push back on me with this, Iain, but I wouldn't say Rishi Sunak is an entirely innocent party in this as well. When you write such a controversial letter as he did, basically disagreeing with the Prime Minister and the Transport Secretary's policies, I side with Rishi Sunak, actually. I think he's much closer to where I would want the country to be than the rest of the government. But when you write a letter like that and you copy it into so many people, that's basically Whitehall practice for you wanting it to be leaked. Now, we don't know who leaked it. The rumor is that it perhaps Department of Transport officials. But that will partly, justify Boris Johnson's, outrage. You don't behave like that if you want confidential government to work. Yes, the Prime Minister overreacted by reportedly, and I believe Tim Shipman, reportedly having this outburst in front of 12 Downing Street officials. But let's not pretend that the Chancellor is entirely innocent party in this either.
Yeah, I mean, I'd push back on that slightly in that, what would Jim Callaghan have done if Dennis Healey had written a letter? And of course, he did write letters. It's standard practice to put something on the record that you're particularly concerned about, that you may have had a discussion about with the Prime Minister, or it was in open cabinet, and you just want it, you and your officials want it down in print that you lodged an objection or flagged a concern. So that's okay. Not sure on the sort of copying it in side of things, but I would defend him. Would defend him on that basis. On the leak, I've no idea where it came from, but it's a very kind of cack-handed way to respond, to explode.
Oh, completely.
Like that. To go tonto. What would Jim Callaghan have done? He'd have just raised his eyes to the ceiling and said, Dennis has overdone it in the letter, and then phoned him up and had a go at him, and they'd have had a spat, like sort of grown-up Prime Minister and Chancellors do. More complicated, of course, in the Thatcher years, and then the Brown-Blair partnership, and of course was notoriously difficult. But very little good politically comes of being at war with your Chancellor. There should be a creative tension, because the two departments, the two individuals, the roles, are trying to achieve different things. I mean,
can I put you on the spot? Can I put you on the spot a bit, Iain? We've got a very powerful piece on the reaction site today from Bruce Anderson, who's basically calling on the Prime Minister to go. How close are you personally to sharing Bruce's conclusion?
I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to know, as you indicated at the beginning, whether this is it's August. Things do happen in August, but
like First World War.
I couldn't tell you in terms of prediction on Boris. I couldn't tell you whether the guy is going to last 10 months or 10 years, because there will be some of his supporters watching this, and supporters in the parliamentary party and elsewhere, who say, look, get real. He's not even behind in the polls yet, and he's got a majority of 80, a leader of the opposition who has failed to connect with the public. Yes, there are problems ahead economically, on inflation, on greenery, and all the rest of it. But this is for the birds, because he's going to be around until the middle of the decade and beyond. That may be the case. What I find intensely frustrating is that I think there is, as well as there being problems, there are huge opportunities for this country. Actually, the economy is booming, in danger of overheating, but the economy really is recovering fast. We've left the European Union. That, of course, comes with its difficulties, but we have no excuse, no option other than to crack on with it. And industries of the future, life sciences, finance, remaking the city, reshoring in terms of manufacturing. The union is potentially in much better shape than people realize long term. So the scale of the opportunity is huge. What I object to with the Prime Minister is just this sort of chaotic, shambolic behaviour, which, and this is what happened in Scotland last week, undid so much good work, where there's been officials and some ministers working diligently for months on building a better case for the union, and with one careless, stupid, bad joke, he unpicks it all, and it will be remembered, because Scotland being what it is politically, will be remembered for years. So that doesn't really answer your question, which maybe I'm avoiding it, about whether you're asking me whether I think he should go.
That for me is the bigger question, really. I've stopped making political predictions. Well, I say I have. I attempted occasionally, but I don't know how long he'll last. But I am increasingly close to the view that he just doesn't seem up to the to the job. I think if he was surrounded by the right people, I could see it working, but we keep waiting for him to be surrounded by the right people, and he's not put them there, both inside number 10 and inside his cabinet. This endlessly delayed reshuffle is a source of enormous frustration when you have really underperforming ministers like the education secretary staying inside the tent and people who have got great talent remaining on the back benches. And so I am getting closer and closer to the point where I just don't want him to be prime minister anymore, let alone whether I know or can predict whether he'll survive.
Yeah, and he's also he seems to be, the reports suggest, and certainly conversations I've had, he just seems angrier and angrier, and the way in which he responded to that Rishi Sunak story is, I think, a real warning sign. When you get to that fury as prime minister, that you're misunderstood, that people are not doing what you want, precisely what you want, and you can't listen to criticism, you're then in a very bad place.
Well, it's Trumpite behaviour, as we were discussing over the weekend. Iain, I said, well, this is the sort of behaviour we're familiar with the Donald, and you said, of course, the difference is it's within a parliamentary system. You can be Trumpite behaviour in the Oval Office and fulfil your term, but a parliamentary party may not wear that sort of behaviour forever.
Yeah, it's about managing, managing the factions within Parliament. Yeah, you have to be wary in a way that a president with a fixed term doesn't necessarily have to be. But look, Boris Johnson. We've been talking about him for a long time. We've been talking about him for years. He's been written off many times and has always bounced back. But just at some point, he won't, because these things just do naturally run their course. I just wanted to conclude, Tim, by asking you a quick question about a subject that I know has animated you has grabbed you over the weekend, which is about Sainsbury's and advertising and one of our favourite subjects, GB News. Tell us what's going on.
Well, there is this general campaign across the left. It's called Stop Funding Hate, if some of our viewers aren't familiar with it. And it's a campaign really to stop advertisers like Sainsbury's supporting newspapers like the Daily Mail and TV channels like GB News that these left-wing groups simply don't like. They call them hate, the Daily Hate, GB Hate, etc., etc. Sainsbury's ran a campaign on GB News. It wasn't clear whether they placed it directly or as advertising works through an intermediary organisation. But there was this campaign to get Sainsbury's to stop advertising ever again on GB News. And this sort of this mealy-mouthed Twitter response that came from the Sainsbury's Twitter account said, we did run a campaign on GB News, but that has now ended, and implying we have no plans to advertise again. Now, the Stop Funding Hate campaign have seen this as a big victory. And I'm infuriated by it, really. One of the glories of a democracy, one of the necessary underpinnings of a democracy is that we have a free media where views are expressed across a diverse range of channels. And if organisations, there will be millions of people who voted for Brexit, who voted for Nigel Farage's UKIP or Brexit party in the past, who shop at places like Sainsbury's or buy their furniture from places like IKEA. And if those sort of organisations and supermarkets are saying that somehow the views of the Mail or GB News are unacceptable, they need to face up to the fact that there are other customers of theirs who are going to be really upset about it. And rather than trying to kowtow to certain sections of their customer base, these supermarkets and British commerce generally that advertises products should make a commitment to fund across the board mainstream TV and newspaper channels and not get involved in all this sort of politics, because otherwise I just think it's going to be bad for our democracy as well as bad for these companies. And the left are really organised, and I just wonder whether we need to start getting organised on the other side as well.
I think it's a very good point. Of course, in the olden days, before big tech companies like Facebook did what they did to mainstream media, there was just a basic assumption, almost just a question of manners and democratic and commercial civility. the big advertisers just placed across big titles, wanting to reach. They were interested. They were just interested in reaching people who would potentially buy the product. So if you're launching a new car, you of course you took adverts and you were launching a new Volvo, you took adverts in the Guardian, you placed adverts in the FT, and maybe the Telegraph.
Did you vote
Politics didn't
Brexit,
enter it.
sir? Oh, we won't sell you a Volvo then. I'm sorry.
But I think it was that the media, of course, was then pre big tech and pre internet in a much stronger position. But I think if this takes hold, I think it's a really regrettable fashion, a real mistake on the left. It then just becomes a kind of tit for tat basis that then if the centre right starts playing the same game, all you end up with is a further weakened media where we need our media to be stronger. So I would just hope that advertisers would and advertising agencies would see sense and just place on the basis of pure commercial decision making rather than getting involved in politics. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up for there today, Tim. If you're not a subscriber to Reaction, it's really straightforward. On YouTube, just hit the subscribe button and also like this video if you did enjoy it. And if you're not a subscriber to Reaction on the main site, the address is just below, and there's a 30-day free trial. You get my newsletter and all of the work of the team and the work that we do analysing politics, economics and culture on Reaction. But until next time, thank you for listening.